Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians. We're in chapter 12. We began looking at the first half of chapter 12 yesterday, in which Paul talks about this extraordinary vision he had, this revelation. He said it happened 14 years ago, from the time he was writing the letter of 2 Corinthians. That puts it in the early 40s, which would place him more than likely either at the end of his time in Tarsus or at the beginning of his time ministering with Barnabas in the city of Antioch. But regardless of where he was, it was this extraordinary vision he had of the Lord. Now, let's look again at verses 2 and 3. He says, I know this man in Christ who 14 years ago was called up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up to paradise. And he heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. Notice he says it was a visionary experience. Notice he says, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. So Paul says that it was a visionary kind of experience. And to be honest with you, I don't know whether it was just a vision or whether I was actually in the third heaven or in paradise. I couldn't tell. I experienced the wonder of it, but whether it was purely visionary, I just saw it, or whether I was literally physically there, I'm not sure. But I experienced the wonder of what he describes as the third heaven or paradise. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's start with the word paradise. He said in verse 4, I was called up to paradise. Now, remember when Jesus was speaking to the thief on the cross, he said, today you will be with me in paradise. So to be in paradise is to be with the Lord. So it's an expression of the heavenly reality. We're in heaven. So Paul experienced this wonder of being caught up into the heavens, into the very presence of God. He's in paradise. But he also calls it the third heaven. The third heaven. Now what exactly does this refer to? Well, there's some debate about it. We're not really sure. Let me tell you what I think maybe it points to. I think it's a reference to the tabernacle in the Old Testament. Remember when Moses was on Mount Sinai, he was giving the instructions for building the tabernacle, the place of worship. And later, of course, Solomon will build the temple, and he would use the same pattern that the tabernacle followed. Now, remember the tabernacle, when you would come into the courtyard, you would approach the altar. That was in the courtyard, and that's where the sacrifices were made. And then you would go into the tent of meeting. The first room of the tent of meeting was the holy place. That's where the altar of golden incense was, and the table of the bread of the presence, and the golden lampstand. And then you would enter the inner part of the of the tent of meeting, and that would be the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. And it was felt that God's presence symbolically presided over the Ark of the Covenant. That was seen as the footstool of his throne. Now, you remember, only the high priest would enter the most holy place, and he would only enter once a year on the Day of Atonement. But you see, the first realm of the tabernacle was the courtyard, where the worshiper could go to offer his sacrifices, but no further. The second realm was the first room of the tent of meeting. That's the holy place, where the priests could go to do their ministry on the altar of incense and with the bread of the presence and the gold lampstand. And then the third room was the ark, where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the presence of God was felt to be, where only the high priest could go. You see, the deeper in you get, the more into the presence of God you get. Notice it's the third area, the third space, where the presence of God is symbolically felt to be. That's why the high priest only went in there once a year on the Day of Atonement. I think it's that realm of three. The third space, the most holy of holies, is where God is, where God's presence is symbolically expressed to be in the tabernacle. So I think that image goes over to the third heaven. So in other words, the third heaven represents the realm of God. It's what we mean when we say God is in his heaven. God is in heaven. That's what Paul meant by the third heaven. So he said in this visionary experience, he was called up into the very realm of God. He was called up into the very presence of God. He was caught up into deep heaven, as it were, the third heaven, the very presence of God. What an experience that Paul describes that happened to him 14 years before, when he was caught up into the very presence of God, into the third heaven, the realm of God. He was caught up into paradise and had a wondrous experience of God. So he's basically saying, these false apostles who are criticizing me, God gave me this 14 years ago because I belong to him. Not because I'm anything special. It was all by grace that he gave me this wondrous experience of being his. I am an apostle. I saw this vision of being caught up into the very presence of God, into third heaven, into the paradise of God. Now, there's just more we want to say about this vision, and we'll look at that in tomorrow's session. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians.